In recent years, we've seen an increase in confrontations between police and civilians, many of which have made regional and national headlines. Police are utilizing new technology, increasingly advanced tools, and new methods and techniques which can present big questions for all of us. For example, when is the use of deadly force appropriate? Are our officers adequately trained in the use of non-lethal force? Are police forces becoming overly militarized? What are the pros and cons of officers wearing body cameras? This evening, we've assembled 4 distinguished panelists to address these and other important questions and to discuss the issues and challenges facing today's police officers. I will now introduce our panelists. Immediately to my right is Sheriff Mark Brown. And I will give you, I know many of you know Sheriff Brown, but I will give you a little bio for your benefit. Sheriff Brown graduated from the University of Oregon, where he earned a Bachelor's of Science degree with a major in political science and a minor in psychology. Following college, he served as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Navy. In 1974, he began his career with the Washington State Patrol, where he subsequently served the citizens of Washington State for over 30 years. He was first elected Sheriff of Island County in November of 2006, and he ran unopposed in the 2010 and 2014 elections. Sitting to his right is Greg Banks. Greg Banks is our current Island County prosecutor. Greg Banks has an engineering degree from the University of Connecticut. Following a degree from the University of Washington Law School, he became a deputy prosecutor for Island County. He has been elected Island County prosecutor for 5 four-year terms. As prosecutor, he and his deputies are responsible for prosecuting all felony crimes in Island County, as well as misdemeanors in the unincorporated areas. He advises county officials on their legal duties and represents them in civil litigation. He also advises law enforcement on issues of criminal law and the constitutional limitations for police carrying out their duties. Sitting to his right is Ray Helsley. Mr. Helsley graduated from Seattle University with a degree in journalism. He is a decorated combat veteran who served as a U.S. Army infantry officer in Vietnam from 1967 to 1972. He has 29 years of law enforcement experience, 22 years with the Oak Harbor Police Department as a police officer and patrol sergeant, and 7 years as a deputy marshal for the town of Coupeville. Among his many police duties, he has served as a commander for an Island County SWAT team. He's been an educator in the criminal justice field since 1993, and he is currently working as an instructor at Skagit Valley College. And last but not least, sitting to his right is Chris Carney, an attorney. Chris Carney graduated from the University of Washington School of Law in 2000. He is a civil rights, personal injury, criminal defense, and civil litigation attorney. He is also an active member of the American Civil Liberties Union, and in a previous law practice, he was a staff attorney for the Public Defender Association, a nonprofit organization that advocates for the reform of the criminal justice system and represents indigent clients. Working in cooperation with the Innocence Project Northwest, he has twice helped free innocent people who had spent years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Would you all take a moment and welcome our panelists? I will give each of our distinguished panelists a brief opportunity to make some opening comments on 21st century policing. I will then ask each of the panelists some directed questions as the moderator. That's the moderator's privilege. Afterwards, we'll open the floor to questions from our audience and those following this forum on Twitter. Before we get started, I should let you know that Ed Green, the Oak Harbor Chief of Police, was invited to participate in tonight's panel and wanted to do so, but he was obliged to attend the last planning meeting for Oak Harbor's National Night Out, scheduled for August the 4th. And with that being said, I'd like to now turn to Sheriff Mark Brown. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marshal, and thank you all for affording me the opportunity to participate in this very important panel discussion. The concept of 21st century policing is extremely complex. I will certainly tell you that. I actually, 3 or 4 of my staff volunteered to be here tonight in the event that we have questions. They're trainers in non-lethal force and use of force situations, so if we have specific questions, they can participate from the audience. Just to start with, and by the way, I didn't time this, so please help me out if I'm halfway through and only a third of the way done. Please let me know. I guess you wouldn't know that, but you can at least let me know when I'm half through. Number one, I'll just address the questions as they come up in terms of the Island County Sheriff's Office. You know, and the first question is, when is the use of deadly force appropriate? I think you can't go directly to that question without first talking about the use of force in general. In general, it is defined as the amount of force reasonably appears necessary given the facts and circumstances perceived by the deputy at the time of the event to effectively bring an incident under control. Now, the word arrest is not in here because oftentimes a deputy can go into a situation where people are fighting and you have to get people apart and get under control. So use of force may be necessary in those situations, but certainly would be looked at. And I think it's important to remember that no policy can realistically predict every possible situation a deputy might encounter. And it's recognized that each deputy must be entrusted with well-reasoned discretion regarding the appropriate use of force. And I think this is an important point, and it falls back on training, and hopefully I'll have a few minutes to talk about the training that these deputies receive, because that discretion is paramount in what's happening today. I think it is. And how we look at it, and how we treat it, and how we're trained. Those things are at the point of the spear. While it's the goal of every law enforcement encounter to minimize injury to everyone involved, nothing in this policy requires a deputy to actually sustain a physical injury before applying reasonable force. In other words, you don't have to take a blow before stopping the blow that's about to come. You can react to it. I mean, that's fairly obvious. Within our agency, every reported use of force goes through the chain of command up through to me. So I see every reported use of force, and we evaluate those. Now, the issue with deadly force is when you protect, a deputy can use deadly force to protect himself, herself, or others from what he or she reasonably believes would be an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And I would have to say this should be a standard for anybody, any citizen that wants to use deadly force. There has to be an imminent threat, perceived threat of serious bodily injury or death to you or others. And that's a high standard, and it should be. Number 2 question, are police forces becoming over-militarized? I'm going to speak locally in Island County. I would say that we are not. We certainly have access to equipment that can be deployed in high-risk situations. I say can be deployed. And this consists of heavier armor protective vests, helmets, AR-15 rifles with laser scopes for accuracy, and we even have joint use of an MRAP, an armored vehicle that we share with Oak Harbor. Now, again, I'm going to emphasize when necessary. We don't patrol in these vehicles. We don't use the helmets and heavy armor when we're in patrol mode. But it certainly should be available for those times in high-risk situations, which I have seen this MRAP in a joint use operation. Very effective. And by the way, nobody was hurt or injured in a very highly potentially volatile situation. So it does have its purpose. Admittedly, I don't think we're ever going to go back to what I call a Adam 12 look, which, you know, was pretty good look overall, but it just probably won't happen in today's policing. However, you know, I still believe the uniform gear we wear is not or shouldn't be offensive to citizens within our community, and really no one has called me to express serious concern about the uniforms that my officers wear. So, now, are officers adequately trained in the use of non-lethal force? We in the Island County Sheriff's Office do annual comprehensive use of force training. The training covers a variety of situational scenarios starting at the high end of active shooter and hostage situation, along with techniques in what we call unarmed defensive tactics and use of less than lethal force. Oh, I'm right on schedule here. So, this training encompasses communication skills, and I emphasize that because we're going to talk about the communication skills that are now being trained. Because a trained police officer needs to be able to communicate, and oftentimes that can dictate how a contact goes. So, I think that's very important. The training encompasses training in transportation of violent prisoners, use of pepper spray, and yes, we have tasers in our arsenal, our toolbox, if you will. Our trainers actually use videos taken from police cams, police car cameras, and counters that bring light to mistakes made by officers in order to further educate on appropriate use of force. Mistakes that the officers made. And some of them are rather harsh to look at because they show an officer being killed on camera. Or they can show an officer making a contact in an inappropriate way to sort of agitate more so a person that's being contacted. So it works both ways, and we use those in our training sessions. A higher level of training is offered to those on a warrant arrest team. I have a qualified warrant arrest team that uses what I call a kinetic energy projectile. It's actually a 44 millimeter launcher that shoots a variety of non-lethal, I wouldn't call them weapons. It's things like marking liquid, malodorant, soft baton, or I guess you'd call it a beanbag, and tear gas deployment being the most common. They're rarely used. Now, we used one just last week, the actual soft baton, and it was very effective overall. I mean, not initially effective, but overall it worked, and the individual was taken into custody without being injured. And then I want to talk briefly about the training a new recruit gets at the Police Academy Training Center. It's modeled after a new concept nationwide. The state of Washington has it. It's called Guardian versus Warrior. And so the training is shifting from the old concept. When I went through, it was all about defending yourself and the warrior tactic, because you have to be a warrior on certain occasions, but more often than not, you're that guardian. So that training, without going into a lot of detail, goes into de-escalation, communication techniques, crisis intervention, and critical thinking. And Sue Rohr is the director of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission and goes nationwide with this kind of an approach. And it's being well received. They train administrators, folks like myself, that get cadets out of the academy back in terms of how we can support this concept, these de-escalation techniques. And folks, they work as best they can. Sometimes they don't work, but we utilize them. And then finally, the pros and cons of body cameras. Body cameras do not solve problems, but they do reveal the truth. They can be good for both law enforcement and the public. They can supply good evidence, help promote healthy interactions between law enforcement and the citizens, and increase accountability and help improve public trust. I myself had a patrol camera in a patrol car when I worked for the State Patrol. Body cameras also carry an inherent risk to invade privacy. Law enforcement officers such that work for me oftentimes see people at very sensitive times, victims of domestic violence, death notification of a family member, and juvenile interaction in a home where you run in to try to solve a problem. Currently, if video was taken of such incidents, the recording would be subject to being disclosed. And you could see it up on YouTube, and that's wrong, folks. You just can't have that kind of invasion of privacy and sensitive issues to be seen later. Now, we need to work this out, and until such time we can agree legislatively to allow certain video to be exempt from public disclosure and or turn the camera off at these sensitive times, I'm not comfortable with deploying these devices. Now, what I would say to the legislature is, let's not jump into the deep end of the pool, let's start at the shallow end. Let's start with having the officers have the ability to turn that camera off in these sensitive situations, and then challenge them if they turn it off in an inappropriate situation. So I think I'm about out of time, and I think I'm close to the end of what I had to say. So thank you for allowing me that.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. I especially appreciate the fact that Sheriff Brown took these 4 questions head on because I was going to have to ask them otherwise. I'd like to now turn to Prosecutor Mr. Greg Banks.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And Marshall, I was expecting you to ask those questions, so I'm not going to take them head on in my opening remarks, but I certainly hope, folks, if you have more questions about any of those topics, you want more clarification, or there's things you're wondering about, please ask us. Unless you're living under a rock, I think it's pretty obvious that our country is going through some tectonic changes, some big shifts in the way that the government institutions that deal with people's behavior, how those institutions are changing. And by those institutions, I'm talking primarily about 2 things, and one is the mental health system, which I think it's hard to have the discussions we're talking about tonight without touching on the mental health issues that are out there in the community. And then, of course, the law enforcement and criminal justice systems. And it seems to be in the news every day. It's in the news this morning. I'm sure many of you have heard about this situation in Cincinnati and the prosecutor that filed murder charges against a police officer there. And so that's an issue. I mean, those issues are hugely important, I think, to all of us that are sitting up here, and should be to all of you. Even if you don't have those personal interactions with the police force, with the courts that may involuntarily detain or commit somebody for being because they're mentally ill and dangerous to themselves. It's a measure of our society and how advanced we are as a society. And so it seems to me, we keep seeing bad news. We keep seeing bad conduct by police officers, sometimes by courts, by prosecutors. And I know all of us have talked about the fact that, well, when a police officer does something well, it's just run-of-the-mill to be expected, and it doesn't make news, and it shouldn't make news. But the fact that we seem to be being drenched in these stories lately, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I think it's a good thing in that that's what triggers change. We clearly are in need of some reform in this country, in this state, and in this locality. I mean, none of us are doing this perfectly, and we've been evolving our practices since we became a country, and we still are, and we still will be long after we're all gone. I have no doubt about that. So I think change is good, and not just for the sake of change, but because we have some problems. And one of the ways to get that change is, I think, excellent programs like these. I mean, unless you're just a news junkie, like I tend to be, and sit around and spend your spare time listening to the radio or reading the internet, which is kind of an echo chamber anyway, I think this is a great way to improve what we're doing and even what the broader community is doing. I think these conversations are now happening throughout the country, and it's unfortunate that people have been hurt to get the awareness level up to where it is. But I'm thankful that the awareness level is here, and you've invited us here to talk about these things. I don't think that people like Sheriff Brown or Ray Helsley or Chris Carney have all the answers. We probably don't even know all the questions. And again, that's why these forums are so important, because I'm hoping you all leave learning something, but I also am pretty sure that we're all going to leave having learned something as well. And that's part of the give and take, and that's how we make our systems better. You won't hear me saying our systems don't need some fixing, because they surely do. So I'll wait for your questions, and I don't know where you'll be going in 90 minutes, or whatever's left here. I think a few things, ideas, if you're wondering what to ask, I kind of doubt you are since you're all here, but an issue that's maybe bigger on the national scale than it appears to be in Island County, but trust me, it exists everywhere. It's this issue of bias and implicit bias. And if you're not sure what I mean, ask me. I'll talk about it. And I think Chris Carney would be happy to talk about that too. it's something that exists, I think, in all of us, and it exists in police officers and prosecutors and judges and juries. And it does skew the way our systems work. I think talking a little bit about mental health care is something we can talk about. We don't have mental health experts on this panel, but again, we all interact, I think, with the mentally ill or people that are just having mental crises that maybe aren't even chronically ill. It's just a fact of life. I think I would anticipate questions about officer-involved shootings, and that's sort of the euphemism that we use, this sort of, well, it doesn't sound as bad as police officer killings. It's an officer-involved shooting. And I'm prepared to answer questions about what that looks like from the prosecutor's perspective, and what sort of is the record in Washington State with cases that have been brought and not brought, and maybe why that is. And of course, body cameras. That's one of the questions Marshall had, or is on the flyer. It's a huge issue, particularly in Washington, but really around the country. And I happen to, so I'm on the Prosecutors of Washington. We have an association of the 39 prosecutors, and within that, there's a group of 5 of us, and we serve on this best practices committee. Because we recognize we're prosecutors, and we're not perfect, probably far from it. And we're examining, among other things, what does the use of body cameras mean for police, but also for prosecutors. Sometimes it's hard for us to tell the police exactly what to do, but we can hopefully give them some guidance. And there's just a ton of stuff going on out there, and you can find different takes on what body cameras should be used for, when they should be used, how they should be used, how the video should be handled. They're all over the map right now. And from the Department of Justice to little itty-bitty police agencies in the middle of Oklahoma somewhere. And so I think there's going to be a lot of shakeout in how that ultimately works out. And Mark identified some of the really big issues already. There's one thing, and I don't want to silence people or shut people up, but there's something I will have a hard time talking about tonight, and I might as well just say it now, and that's about the recent tragic death of Keaton Ferris in the Island County Jail. Some of you may know I'm still reviewing that case, researching the law. I'm consulting with other prosecutors about possible criminal accountability for the people that were involved. It would be totally inappropriate for me to talk about that now. I think to the sheriff's credit, and I think in a way that's probably unusual when these things happen, and I hate to say these things like it's not a very serious, tragic occurrence. It's a terrible, terrible thing that happened, and it should have never happened. But to Mark Brown's credit, I felt that he acknowledged from the very beginning that what happened was wrong. And now Mark has, besides me playing my part in that, the county has also, as the county does, they've retained outside lawyers to look after the county's financial interests. And they've really told Mark, you can't talk anymore. I mean, it goes through the lawyers now. And I think as a lawyer, I'd have to say, well, Mark is wise to heed that advice. And I'm actually a little bit on the outside of that because I'm looking at the criminal side of it, not the lawsuit side of it. I can't do both. I can't defend the county and at the same time consider prosecuting people that work for the county. It's a conflict of interest. So I would ask, I know people want to talk about it. It's going to be difficult, and you may feel like we're dancing around it. It's just the timing right now is going to make it really hard for us. So we need to be careful. I guess that's all I want to say that, and I hope you understand why I might have to say that. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, the number of questions that I have is dwindling with each panelist, but I think I've got 3 left over. We'll see what happens after Chris Carney talks. Our next Panelist is Ray Helsley, and Ray, let's hear from you.
The panel members were just shown a list of topics and encouraged to just pick some that they wanted to elaborate on. And it happens that I picked a couple that Sheriff Brown has already touched on. And I'm reasonably certain that the content of my comments is not going to be too different from his, but the perspective will probably be a little different. I was a foot soldier and a street cop, and I've been an educator for a number of years now, charged with training prospective law enforcement people, and so my comments are kind of going to be from that viewpoint. But the first thing that caught my attention was the question, are the police becoming militaristic? I have served on both sides of the issue, both in the military and on the streets as a cop, and I can tell you that there are similarities. It's easy to make a comparison between a police force and an armed force. The police wear uniforms, they wear ranks of insignia, and they call each other sergeant and captain. They have a chain of command. They use weapons as the tools of their trade. They undergo training in the use of those weapons. But I'm here to tell you that's pretty much where it ends. There is an underlying term that serves both sides that I think causes a confusion, and that is the word force. An armed force and a police force, by definition, they will use force in the accomplishment of their mission. But when a military unit is out to accomplish a mission, the stated mission of the infantry is to close with and kill, capture, or destroy the enemy. No matter what label you put on that, that brings to mind the term that was frequently used in the 60s and 70s, body count. Okay? When a police force is given a mission, they also use the tools of their trade and they apply force, but the philosophy is totally different. You're not going to hear a police administrator bragging about their body count. The requirement placed on the police is to go to the scene of an incident and restore order using the minimum level of reasonable force, and at the same time protecting the constitutional rights of all of the persons involved. So the use of force takes a 180-degree turn from the military concept of use of force. Mark gave you the definition of reasonable force, and that definition is at the very basis of the decision-making process for police when they arrive at the scene of an incident. If you notice, each one of you received a handout that was on your chair when you came in, and this handout contains 3 of the slides that, as a police educator, I show my law enforcement students when we discuss the use of force. Following the definition of the term reasonable force, the students are then taught that there is an entire menu of force options, which we call the use of force continuum. And an officer arriving at the scene of an incident has already been trained and is familiar with every one of the items on this use of force continuum. They know when they get to an incident what resources they have in order to gain control. They also know that they are required to select the option that is the minimum reasonable amount of force necessary to gain that control. And once the situation is under control, they are further required to either stop using the force or to stop using it until and unless the resistance continues, and then only again reapply the basic, the most reasonable amount of force at the lowest level in order to get control. They also are thoroughly schooled in the further definition, if you look at the third slide, in deadly force. Deadly force is the final option. You'll notice at the bottom of the force continuum, the officer's arrival is the very first use of force. And quite often, simple officer presence is enough to gain control of a situation, and that's as far as it goes. Police are not required to go through the continuum from bottom to top until they reach an appropriate level of force that works. And herein lies the tale. The officers must be trained and capable of arriving at a situation, instantly analyzing that situation to determine where they should enter on the level of force continuum, apply that level of force, gain control, and then de-escalate if possible. To use deadly force, there must be 3 situations all present simultaneously before deadly force is legal or authorized. Not only must there be a threat of imminent death or danger or serious bodily harm present at the scene, there must be some kind of a means of that threat being carried out. And there must be a substantial step taken by the person who poses the threat in order to employ those means. This is known as jeopardy, ability, and opportunity. And law enforcement students and cadets know that until all 3 of those situations occur simultaneously at the scene of an incident, the use of deadly force is inappropriate. The training is classroom situations, mock scene scenarios, and simulators designed to give as realistic as possible an experience that puts the stress of actually making the decision on the police trainee. But in all reality, it's just training. When a police officer graduates from the academy and goes out on the street, just like a newly drafted soldier who goes through training and gets sent off to the war, nobody knows for sure how they're going to react in combat until it actually happens. So the ones that survive their initial situations get better and better until you've got people that can consistently make the right decision. Educators and police trainers do their best to make sure that the potential future law enforcement officers know all these things and get the best training possible. And then it's up to their leaders and their administrators to make sure that as they carry out their jobs on the street, they're doing it right. And if they don't do it right, they know that there's going to be questions to answer. So I think one thing that might put this in perspective, to give you an idea about how serious the world of law enforcement is about this concept of minimum force, is just to let you know that the National Tactical Officers Association, which trains and certifies SWAT teams, is very proud of the fact that as a national average, 95% of the time when SWAT arrives at a scene that has gotten out of control otherwise, the situation is resolved without a shot. 95 times out of 100, the situation is resolved without the use of deadly force. And they're proud of that. And I think it says something about the attitude of whether or not we're militarized and how we feel about protecting lives and the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And again, last but not least, Mr. Carney.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here, and I'm grateful to see that there's so many people who are interested in this topic. It's one that's important to me, and I think important to all of us. The first thing that I want to say is that it is worth reminding ourselves that the police work for us. We are their employers, we are their bosses, we are the citizens of the jurisdictions that they are hired to protect. And that is something that's easy to forget because nobody likes to be told how to do their job. And police officers are human beings just like the rest of us. But it's worth remembering that we have the power and the right to insist that the job be done in the way that is consistent with the safety of everyone, not just police officers. Now, the second thing I want to say immediately after that is that we're all on the same side here. We all want the same things. All of us, me included, want every police officer to go home safe at the end of every shift. Every single one of us does. Nobody wants to see harm done to police officers. What we want is to be as smart as we possibly can be about the way they do a job that can be very dangerous. And along those lines, I would recommend that anyone who is interested in this topic take a look at a study that was written by Harvard's Kennedy School of Government relating to the reform efforts of the Los Angeles Police Department in the 90s. And some of you may remember the Rampart scandal and the way that spun up into a Department of Justice overseen reform effort for the entire police department. I won't go into all the details, but these are the key findings. Despite the fact that many of the rank and file officers resisted every effort by the Department of Justice to institute reforms, the results were that police officers were safer. There were fewer in the line of duty injuries for police officers after the reforms than there were before. Citizens were safer in two ways. Fewer people got hurt while being arrested after the reforms than before. And violent crime decreased. Let me just let that sink in for a minute. There was a lot of resistance to those reforms, just like there has been in Seattle, which is where I live, for the reforms that the Department of Justice is working on with the Seattle Police Department. Nobody likes to be told how to do their job, but the reforms work. So, I'd like to start on issues that I think should be looked at for police reform by picking up something that Greg mentioned, which is there exists a thing called implicit or unconscious bias. And that just means that whether you know it or not, you react differently, all of us do, me included, to people that don't look like you. And you may not be aware of it. This is particularly important in law enforcement, and I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm just going to talk about one very important study that was recently done about this. Psychologists designed a study to test people's ability to make a snap judgment about whether or not a person in the exercise was holding a harmless object, like a wallet or a cell phone, or a weapon. You may be able to predict the results. When the person being evaluated, in other words, the person who was a potential threat, was a white person, the results were half decent. People were reasonably good at telling the difference between a cell phone and a gun. When it was a person of color, the error rate shot through the roof. Now, the first time this study was done, college students were the subjects being tested in their ability to judge. And one might think, well, they're not trained, they aren't law enforcement officers. The results were just as bad when they did it again with law enforcement officers. And it didn't matter what race the officer was. The only thing that mattered was what race the subject or suspect was. Now, I'm not here to say that all police officers are racist. Absolutely not. Because we're all subject to this same implicit bias, and it's because our culture has bombarded us our entire lives with images, particularly of men of color, as dangerous and violent and armed. it's not our fault that it got jammed into our heads. But it's our responsibility to figure out what to do with it. And it's our responsibility as engaged citizens to help our police officers figure out what to do with it, and to help to set policies that will engage them and help them learn what to do about it. Now, I've got more to say about that, as you might imagine, but I'm going to move on to a couple other things. Ray is right. You don't always know how a person is going to react to a stressful situation until they're in one. Unfortunately, though, there are clues. And what I and many other people who pay attention to this sort of thing have been especially frustrated by over the years is how often we see a particularly egregious mistake made by a police officer and then later learn of all the red flags that were present in that officer's past prior to the time they made a mistake that cost someone their life. And it's been equally disappointing to me in the times that I have spoken to trainers and supervisors and chiefs of police, how little attention they pay to monitoring those red flags. There are national standards that call for monitoring of uses of force, citizen complaints, and a host of other things that are supposed to constitute risk factors for deadly mistakes being made down the road. They call it the early intervention system. And I've never seen a police department do it as well as I'd like to see it done. And on another level, I've never seen any police department devote time, effort, and research into determining what are the right red flags even to be looking for. It certainly makes sense intuitively that using force more than 7 times in a 6-month period is something that you should take a closer look at. But nobody's doing research to figure out what are the specific risk factors that lead to mistaken uses of deadly force. Even when those red flags are present, they're often not detected because the police department has the records, but nobody has a clear responsibility to monitor them and to add up uses of force within periods of time that are necessary to trigger supervisor review. So that's something that every police department should be looking at, and it can make us all safer. I'm going to run out of time before I hit everything here, but I think that it's extremely important when we know how easy it is for any of us to make a mistake in a critical situation to focus on ways that our officers can be trained not to get into those situations. And it's a term that we've all heard before. It's called de-escalation. I think of it as, how do you avoid getting to the moment where you have to make a split-second decision about whether to kill someone in the first place? And the mistakes that we're all seeing on TV every week, it seems, those are not situations where officers showed up and somebody already had a gun to another person's head. I don't think any of us have any complaint about an officer using deadly force when there is unambiguously the risk of death to an innocent person or to the officer. None of us have any complaint about that. There was a shooting in Seattle recently where a man charged at a police officer holding a 16-inch knife or machete, and the police officer tried to run away and had to shoot him. It's tragic, but we can't blame a police officer in that situation. Where we all have a problem is the one that we saw on TV that happened in Ohio this week, where an officer, for whatever reason, decided to escalate a routine traffic stop to the point where an unarmed man was shot in the head. That could have been avoided. That's the situation that we need to focus on, where there didn't need to be a deadly conflict in the first place, where the officer can take a step back, maybe recognize that if a man doesn't have a front license plate on his vehicle, there's no set of circumstances under which he should be killed for that, even if it means taking a step back and letting him get away. So we have a lot of room for improvement. I do believe that the police uniformly want to do better. They uniformly want everyone to be safe. So it's our job to put aside anger and talk about what we can all do to be smart, to make that happen for ourselves. I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. I want to hear from you and hear your questions, but I do want to ask one question, more or less a follow-up to the comments that Chris Carney said. What kind of background checks do prospective police officers undergo, and are they screened specifically for psychological problems or a history of psychiatric illness, such as post-traumatic stress disorder? And this can be addressed by anybody.
Well, we have a background system in our agency. In fact, the Undersheriff, Kelly Mock, who's here tonight, is kind of in charge of that. And we go through an extensive background investigation, including a polygraph and a psychological examination. And we try to look at any and every possibility of an officer's involvement in different situations. And we oftentimes turn people down that otherwise might have, for whatever reason. And we do that on every applicant we have. And it's problematic in terms of the fact that it impairs in many ways the ability to hire folks right away. But we're not, that's why we're down people. Even though we could hire people, we're still in the process of evaluating them. And he could speak more to that if you need more details.
Anybody else on the panel want to respond to that?
I have a question. So when they are psychological evaluated or whatever, is that something that you do all the time? Or is that something you only do when you hire? Because I know that they go through stressful things.
Right. It's a very good question. And we do it in what we call a fitness for duty. If a situation arises where an officer has reacted in a way that we feel that question his ability to do his job, then we do what we call a fitness for duty examination. And that goes back to the psychologist. So that can happen, yes.
Okay, I want to turn now, excuse me, officially to our audience Q&A. This is now your time, but I do want to read you a couple of points. I will now ask audience members who have a question to raise your hand, which some of you have already learned how to do, and we will come by with a wireless microphone because we do want to hear your question. We ask that you stand when you ask your question, if you're not already standing, and let us know which panelist your question is directed to. We also would appreciate it if you would identify which community you're from and if you represent a specific organization. And if you have a comment to share, that's fine. However, I do reserve the right as moderator to move you along if you're taking too long to get to your question. So, for those of us who join us by Twitter, please tweet your questions and comments as you have them, and we will ask them at the appropriate time. So now I will take questions. I guess I'm going to start with the lady over here with her hand up first.
Hi, my name is Martha Yon. We talked about mental health and mental illness. Many people do not realize that they are so closely ingrained to each other, but we often hear mental illness, but mental health is what we should be focusing on. Mental health is what includes all of us. Some of us have a better standing or a better understanding of it. And some days, some of us may have a bad understanding of it, depending on where you're at, depending on your level of education, depending on the stresses that you have within your life and your community. Also, the community has, okay. The community has a responsibility in this as well. Gossip, unfounded rumors. These are things that we have to find a way to cease because they impact the way that the community and the agencies impact them and work together. So my question is, how do we put more education, more prevention within the community and within the agencies as well as the community?
Is that, I take it that's directed to anybody who cares to answer. Anyone on the panel want to respond to that?
I can answer it, I think, at least in terms of what we're doing here. And it's a big problem. It probably comes as no surprise that a lot of the people that wind up being arrested or being put in jail may have some mental health issues, and it's really unfortunate that the state of Washington, like many states, has really dismantled its mental health system, and the place that's left for them is sort of the place of last resort, which is under arrest and in the county jail. Island County, I think like most counties, is struggling to provide more mental health services. Island County does not have the money. They rely on state grants, which are not coming. We have one of the lowest numbers of beds per population for the severely mentally ill in the country. The national average is around 20 per 100,000. We have about 8. There's no place for people to go because our state has shut down hospitals and closed wards and laid off doctors. And they've just left it to the county law enforcement, which I don't know about you, but I think police do a terrific job at being police, but they shouldn't be left to do the mental health work that needs to be done.
Let's see, this gentleman back here with the tie, he was...
Oh, okay, fine. My name is Norman Messer. I'm from Lopez Island. And if you're a news junkie, you probably read my question for you for Sheriff Brown and Prosecutor Banks in the Everett Herald last week. My question was, why have there been no arrests in the murder of Keaton Ferris? And it was not hard for me to guess that you wouldn't be answering that question, so I went looking for some answers myself. And I found a concept called police professional courtesy. And I want everybody here to go home and Google it. Because what that means is police do not hold themselves to the same standards that they hold everybody else. If a police officer pulls somebody over for speeding and somebody shows them a card that I'm a police officer from another jurisdiction, they will not write them up. And I went looking all over the internet. I went to forums where police officers talk to each other. And this concept seems to be rampant throughout the country of professional courtesy, that you do not hold yourselves to the same standards that you hold the rest of us to. And that's fine for a speeding ticket. It's a bummer if I have to pay one and you don't, but it's not murder. But we see it over and over every week. We see a police officer who murdered somebody and then covered it up. They perjured themselves, they tampered with evidence, and their colleagues. Okay, people like to say 99% of police officers are the good guys, but they're not the good guys if they commit perjury, they tamper with evidence, and cover up the crimes of other police officers.
So your question, sir, is there a question? That was a very, I'll give you a chance to ask a question, but you now have to ask the question.
Okay, my question is, what is your policy in Island County regarding professional courtesy to other law enforcement officers? And try and be honest.
Well, I hope I am honest. I don't. I am honest. It exists, and it has existed, and it's mainly for infractions. In my career, the State Patrol, I've arrested doctors, lawyers, police officers, and judges for different crimes. So, but I get that sometimes that happens, and I don't condone it. But it's where it happens that I'm aware of is in the minor infraction violations, somebody might say, or recognize somebody. People have stopped me for speeding and have not given me a ticket. I don't tell anybody who I am, I'll take the ticket. But so there is that element that goes on, and I'm not going to deny that, but to me, it better not be at a higher crime. And so good. Go ahead.
I really would like to move on to someone else. Well, you've taken a lot of time, sir. Thank you very much. I would encourage you to ask these gentlemen afterwards, because I want to get more people. I want to take somebody in the back of the room. You ma'am?
I've been a long-term care ombudsman, and I was licensed by the state of Washington to just step in on adult family facilities to make sure that from time to time that the people were being cared for properly. My question to all of you is, I pretty much was there to police the people that were caring for our elderly. Who is there to police our police that are caring for our people that are in the jails? That's what I'd like to know.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody? Sheriff Brown?
I think I'll answer a question and maybe go beyond my bounds. Admittedly, this is very difficult to talk about, in particular Keaton Ferris, in terms of what's ahead. So I think I need to kind of set the record straight. I think there's a lot of tension and emotion in the room about that. I will tell you personally, as your sheriff, I did not have any knowledge that Keaton Ferris was dying in my jail. And had I had that knowledge, but I know, but if you let me finish, had I had that knowledge, I would have done everything in my power to stop that. Having said that, I know that the next question comes in a form of negligence. What form of negligence do you own in this death? And I think that's yet to be determined. We have federal authorities, that meaning the FBI, the U.S. Attorney, and we have our prosecutor that are looking at that. And I think they need the time to do that. Now, when this first happened, I reached out to Mr. Ferris, and I told him I would investigate this as if it were my own son. And we did that. And it was transparent, and it was on the table, and we own some of it. And what we own will be defined. But what I will tell you is that I think it's important that a leader in my position take the role of correcting the problem and moving ahead. And I think that's one thing we can agree, that we need reforms in our jail system. And I would engage you in conversation afterwards, maybe not now, to talk about those reforms that we've done. Now, I know that not everybody is in agreement to me staying on as your sheriff, but I'm going to do that. I don't know any sheriff in the state of Washington or the nation that I would respect that walked out on a problem like this. I think that sheriff should knuckle down and solve the problem as best he can. This is a risk business, folks. I can't guarantee that people aren't going to die in my jail tomorrow. I pray for it every night that it doesn't happen. I can't guarantee that we're not going to have a mass shooting while we're at this meeting. I pray for that every night too. I'm in a risk business, but I'm not afraid of the risks that are presented to me. I'll do the best job I can moving forward with this. And then I'll let other people evaluate my involvement in terms of what it looks like at the next level. I think we have to have patience to let that happen. I know people are frustrated. I know they don't have patience. I know they want immediate action. Part of the problem is we need to analyze, we need to look at, and we need to talk, and we need to rebuild trust within our communities. And I get that. I get that. I had a huge job ahead of me. But I'm not going to run from it. I'm going to try to do the best I can to come back and answer your questions. And I'm dedicated to doing that. So.
Okay, thank you. Hold a second. I think Mr. Banks.
That's a very good question. So I'll answer her question. The question that I heard was, who polices the police? And the answer is, it's other police. I mean, someone has to do an investigation that's trained in doing investigations, and by and large, that's law enforcement agencies. Now, it might be the local agency, it might be a neighboring agency, it could potentially be the Attorney General's office, although I've found it's extremely rare that I can convince them to get involved in cases. It might be the FBI. It happens more often than you probably think that we do go to an outside agency, and like the sheriff, I've prosecuted police officers and doctors and lawyers as well. We sure try not to extend professional courtesy as it was defined by the gentleman from Lopez Island. And if we think that we have a conflict of interest, I have at my disposal any of the prosecutors in the neighboring counties and the Attorney General as well. I frequently, in very major complex cases, consult with them anyway because I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I acknowledge that. So it's police, and that's, I don't know what else you can do, but I've seen very good police investigations of police officers, and I mean, we've prosecuted them. So.
Thank you.
Marshall, can I add to that?
Yes, the panelists go first.
All
Yes,
right.
go ahead.
Well, I don't mean to insist on going first, but I did have something to say about what Greg said. We have more options than just letting police. We have the option of civilian review panels. That's something that has been worked on throughout the state. None of them are perfect, but all of them are better than not having any civilian involvement and oversight of police actions. And if there is a police agency that isn't at least looking at a civilian review panel, they should be. And furthermore, they should be giving civilian review panels the right to do their own investigation. I'm not a police officer, but I can tell you I know how to ask questions, and I know how to keep asking questions until I get answers. And there's more people in the world who know how to do that than are police officers. So we absolutely need to have a civilian voice in police oversight and in the oversight of all of the operations of law enforcement, including the jails. So those of you who live and vote in this county, think about that.
Can I just, one response, I think what Chris said is true, and I was answering the question in terms, and I don't know why, I'm thinking in terms of criminal prosecution and how that gets brought, which I think is a slightly different scenario than police citizen review panels. But maybe Chris disagrees with me on that, but at any rate.
Let's have some questions from this side. How about the lady in the plaid? We're going to get you a microphone. I'm going to rotate around through the audience. I'll come back to you. Don't give up.
I'm not from this community, so I hope it's okay if I speak anyway. We have several law enforcement officers in our family, including our son. Our daughter-in-law left the police force a few years ago. We were very glad that she's off the streets. Our son now is back in school. He's planning to leave the police force too. These events that are so tragic and so publicized have got to have an effect on those people dealing with the crime that they are getting called to respond to. How are we dealing with their morale? What are we doing? And the worst thing that a police officer could do would be to try to second guess themselves. They have got to respond. They don't have time to think, oh, if I do something, this could be publicized. I could be on national TV.
Thank you very much for that question. A response from anybody?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think it's one that we all need to address perhaps better than we have. We have in the Island County Sheriff's Office a very strong chaplain corps. One thing I do in the agency, I like 10-hour shifts. 8 hours might be more efficient, and 12 hours might be more efficient, but I want these officers under these stressful situations to have minimum of 3 days off a week. I think it's important for them to decompress. And oftentimes they don't have that ability. They have to work the overtime shift. So that's one of the reasons I think we need to make sure they have adequate resources to go to. And I was a peer counselor with the State Patrol. We don't have that problem, or we don't have that person in our agency, but I think that's a good way to go. You have people that listen to people's problems, and you're absolutely spot on. We need to look at police officers in terms of what we feel about their mental state, and we need to address it. That's a very good point.
Are there any other panelist responses before we move on? Okay, someone in let's do that one. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but it's a random thing with me.
Okay, I have some simple questions. My name is Kathleen.
How about one question, please?
Okay, my name is Kathleen Sulek. I'm here from Oak Harbor. In view of what's happened in the nation this last couple of weeks, a lane change offense, a missing license plate, I'm just curious as to why, I realize it's against the law, but why do the police even bother with these little picayune offenses when it seems like there's so many more other things to deal with? And in regards to implicit bias, I'm just also wondering, when a police officer pulls over somebody, the response of that person to the police officer, how much of a part does that play in what happens subsequently?
Good question. Anyone on the panel? Ray?
I'd like to address the first part of your question very simply. Believe it or not, it is a fact that in a community where the police enforce the traffic laws more strictly, there's less crime because people who commit crimes don't want to be recognized, and they tend to avoid places where they might be stopped and identified. And that's actually been one of the good byproducts of community policing in the modern concept, that an area where the police are more active, including traffic enforcement, the crime rates go down. So it's all part of the overall picture. You can't just tell the police, don't sweat the small stuff, just pay attention to the big stuff, because that's not how it works. Okay? The second part of your question may not be as easy. Everyone is human. And I think I started kind of intimating that when I was talking about not knowing how you're going to react under stress. We do try to instill in police officers not to let your feelings get involved in your decision making. I think, though, it's hard for a scenario to play out in which a person is being uncooperative with an officer who's just trying to do his job, and then meeting with resistance. But the mindset that the police are taught, and the ideal mindset, is don't let somebody make you mad and talk you into writing him a ticket. And I have to tell you, as I was a police sergeant for 19 years, all right? And I told my guys, you know, if I catch you writing a ticket because somebody made you mad, I can't tell you what I told them. I should have thought that one through.
Okay, anybody? Chris?
Yeah, I had something to add to that. We have a core value in our culture of freedom of expression. And that means you don't have to like what the person is saying in order for you to respect their freedom to do it. And it is very clearly established that citizens have the right to watch, record, and criticize the police without suffering any consequence whatsoever. As long as their criticism doesn't take the form of actions that endanger other people or police officers, they have the right to do it. That is completely incompatible with the idea of blaming a person who was even flat out rude to a police officer for then having suffered excessive force. The two cannot coexist. And we don't have to like the people that police officers interact with. Sometimes we're not going to. But what I tell people is, you can't be a neurosurgeon, no matter how brave or smart you are, if your hands shake in surgery. And you can't be a police officer if you can't control your temper.
What he said.
What he said. Thank you. Okay, I want to go, okay, let's see, I'm going to go this way. Remember, I'm going to rotate. This person in the black.
Good one.
I can speak loud enough without
Well,
posterity. My name is Art Huffine. I live in rural Island County, just south of Oak Harbor, not too far from our sheriff. I spent 12 years on a citizen advisory group in Seattle Police Department and 2 years on a citywide advisory group. And I'd like to change the tone and topic a little bit. Community policing and the associated partnership with citizen involvement through Block Watch has proved effective in other rural areas in the state to compensate for long response times and the shortage of police officers. What is your position with regards to Block Watch and community policing practices? And I guess that's...
I absolutely support it. And since I've been sheriff, I've probably had close to 50 meetings throughout the county, and I promote it. There's a national model, and I think it's a little too complicated. What I think people need to do is get together on a regular basis, and you can incorporate this with emergency planning as well. You can get together with your neighbors that you trust. That's why you have to start it and not me. You know who you can trust. So you get that group of people together, and you discuss, you know, what's normal in your neighborhood, what to watch for. And I can come out and talk to you. We start those groups. I actually have an alert system where we send out messages to that might be relative to your whatever part of the county you live in terms of the crime that's happening in that area. I strongly promote it, but at a level where we can actually do it. And so, very good point. Thanks for bringing that.
thanks. I'm going to go to, let's see. Gosh, where do I go now? It's hard to know. Let's see, the gentleman back there. I think he in the stripe.
Hi, I'm Bob. I'm from Oak Harbor. And my question is largely about decentralization and better models for policing and for defensive and security services. First, I have a quote: "All government acts, no matter how well-meaning, are enforced with violence and funded by taxes collected through threat of violence. Therefore, all honest discussions of proposed government acts must begin with a discussion of what level of violence is moral and legitimate and why." Then I'd like, coming from an economics perspective, currently we have a monopoly for policing. The problem is that monopolies, by their definition, provide services at a much higher rate than in the market. They provide poor customer service, and they often have perverse incentives. For example, police and all other government agencies fail their way into money. The more crime there is, the more money comes in.
Sir, could you give us a question, please?
Yes.
Not a dissertation.
I'm getting
Can I have a
that.
question? Could we have a question now?
Yes. There are services such as the Threat Management Center in Detroit that serve areas where the police do not. And in almost 20 years of existence, they have never had a shooting. They are a market-based system. And so what I would like to say is that, or what I'd like to ask, and this is for everyone, I'm trying to think of a way to word the actual question. Badges don't grant extra rights. People are people. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely.
And your question is, sir, I'm going to have to cut you off if you don't give me a question now. I'm sorry.
We want, how do we move to a system, in your opinion, where we can move to something more like the Threat Management Center, where we can have competition in the market for security services, rather than a top-down coercive monopoly that relies on the threat of death, of violence and death for non-compliance, ultimately.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone like to tackle that one?
I'll take that.
Thank you. That's a tough one.
So we live in a civilized society with a democratic form of government, and we have gotten together and made the decision that we are going to pool our tax money to provide essential services to everyone. I'm answering the question right now. And that's how we do it. It's not a monopoly. It's not a market-driven solution, because police officers and police agencies aren't making a profit. They're providing a government service. And I don't know the first thing about what's going on in Detroit. I have enough issues to deal with in Island County.
Okay. Go ahead.
Real quick, I think that the majority of this panel is under the I'd say that we're all in realization that training is huge here. The complexity of this job is huge right now. You know, the de-escalation, one that somebody in the audience mentioned, the use of force. This is not something that you can just randomly say, do. I mean, I think the training aspect would dictate that whatever a group you have policing had better be well trained and understand law, and that's critical. And I don't know that your solution would necessarily lean towards that.
It hasn't in the past.
Okay, thank you. Folks, we have about 10 more minutes. Okay, I'm going to put you on notice about that. And so I do want to read a question that was generated through Twitter, right? Just one? Okay. I'm going to ask this one, and then I'm going to ask people with the time left, would you please ask a question and make it short? And I think we'll get more people to get their answers. And I also will tell you that I think the panelists, most of them have said they will stay after the event to answer your questions. So they're not going to be running out the door. They're not going to go through this door after we declare it over. The question from a Twitter person came as follows. What procedure What is the procedure when someone is shot, and what process do officers go through, I presume, when there is a shooting?
Well, we have a use of force review board. I might allow my undersheriff to further comment on the actual procedure himself.
We do have policy that dictates what actions we take in an officer-involved shooting. Those generally are the same things that you would see. That fortunately, I should say that I've been here for over 20 years, and we have not, in my tenure at Island County, had one officer-involved shooting in Island County in the 20-plus years that I've been here. But officers are placed on administrative leave. There's an investigation. Generally, the resource that we use in this region here is called the SMART team. It's a multi-jurisdictional team of investigators that comes in and conducts the investigation, and that's generally how that's handled.
Okay, thank you. I want questions only, please. I'm going to point to you. I want a question. A question.
Okay, so my question is about, it's about training and about communication, and my question is, what is the definition of escalation? The reason I ask this question is because I'm pretty benign looking, and all my encounters with police would create in me a behavior that was not docile. And so what I'm trying to find out is, how do you define that? Because what I see in interactions with police are, shut up, you can't talk, no questions, keep your mouth shut, and that actually incites, it escalates. It's the opposite of de-escalation. So I'm curious about what training and what your protocol, because I think Mr. Helsley's protocol was exact. It's just that it's not being adhered to. So what's your training?
Thank you very
Right,
much.
and it's a common complaint that we get generally on traffic stops of rudeness and sort of escalating behavior. And I think Chris said it very well. I mean, people, we should not be demanding that anybody do something that's not going to harm us or is not illegal. And one of the things we do in our agency is, once you get out of the police academy, you're required to ride with some trained, seasoned officers that are aware of techniques of de-escalation, and they watch the individual as they confront people in tense situations, in traffic stops that go south, and they try to anticipate or watch and evaluate. And that's a critical piece of any training program, that you have those training officers that are qualified to know. And some officers, it's a natural innate ability, and others, I wish it were a natural innate ability. But having said that, you know, we do have personalities, folks. We are people, and we are people that are reflective of society that we represent. And not always are they polite, and I hear about the ones that aren't. And I was a training officer for 25 years with the Washington State Patrol, and I trained a lot of cadets, and I told them, I said, if you stop somebody for a speeding infraction, it isn't your highway. It isn't your law. You simply tell somebody that at a point in time you were over the speed limit according to my radar. You don't have to tell them that you're speeding in my highway, and you don't have to take ownership. You have to show that kind of compassion, and hopefully this would not, because people people have, I mean, when they're stopped, it's pretty intense to them, and officers don't often take that into consideration.
The question is, though, what is the training officers receive about people asking questions? Because what I see is, move over there, keep your mouth shut, no information is going to be given to you, and no voice is going to be given to you to ask questions. It's all shut you down.
Right.
The minute you're in compliance, you're just going to wait. You're going to wait until the whole thing plays out, and then you'll be dealt with. And so if you as a citizen see something you disagree with, you're in danger if you speak out. So
Right.
what is the training?
Well,
the officers
so what they do is they set down officers in the academy environment, and they just pepper them with questions, with the most obnoxious type of person you can be, sitting in a chair simulating a traffic stop. And they watch and react, these officers, and they grade them on this. They do this, and it's a very, and it has to be part of our program. One of the most disgusting videos I saw, and I've seen so many lately, it involved the initial contact of I can't remember which one it was now, but it said, you know, I forget what it was, put that cigarette out. I can't remember what exactly it was. And I don't know it unless I've asked people, hey, you know, you're blowing smoke in my face. Can you blow the other way? But if you demand something does something just because you're angry, then that escalates the situation. So we try to get that. Now, folks, it's going to happen. People are human. They may have had something that just occurred, and they may now be, you know, it was troublesome to them, and now be contacting another violator. But still, it's something that we have to constantly watch and grade.
Okay, I think we need to stop there. We have to stop now. I want to know, does anyone else on the panel want to respond to this? I thought it was worth taking the time. Does Ray or anybody else? To this her concern?
It almost sounds like a scenario where we train people not to allow a traffic stop to escalate into something by making sure that the person that's been stopped knows exactly what the situation is, and that would not preclude that they would obviously be allowed to ask questions if they don't understand why they were stopped. It's dangerous, and police officers are taught when you stop someone, let them know exactly what the situation is, because you never know if you just stop someone who's murdered his wife and has her body in the trunk. And if you don't tell them that you stopped them because they have a tail light out, they're going to assume it's because the body's in the trunk, and you're going to end up in a bad situation. So that is one aspect of de-escalation or an attempt to prevent an escalation right there, where the training tries to kick in.
Okay, remember I said these gentlemen will be available to you afterwards. I have time for one more question. I have no biases. I'm going to take the gentleman in the red back there. Remember, a question, please. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, thank you very much. This is a good one to end the questioning on. Thank you. Is it a question, sir? I hope it's a question, please.
My name is George. I'm from Mount Vernon. My question is to you, Mark Brown. What would happen if you were found to be negligent to your pension in this case of Keaton Ferris? Or you quit?
I don't know that I can answer that, because the answer is I don't know. But what I can tell you is let's let the process work out. I don't know where this is going to go.
Procedural question. Has that happened before to a sheriff? And what happened? Did he lose his pension or not?
To be honest with you, I don't know. Kelly, do you know the answer to that?
We need a mic. Could we get a mic, please, so we get this?
I don't know. I really don't know. I apologize. It's one I didn't research there.
Okay,
I will say
think,
one thing about that. I don't know the answer either, but I do know that we recently prosecuted a Boeing employee for a very serious sex offense, and I know for a fact that he did not lose his Boeing pension because he used it to hire a bunch of lawyers once he was in prison. So anyway, but that's Boeing. I have no idea what the government would do with that.
Okay, I think we're at the end, and so I'd like to now add some concluding remarks. We've come to the end of our allotted time. If you've not already done so, please complete your evaluation of our program and discussion. I know earlier you did not have the evaluation forms. I trust they're in the back of the room now. Okay. Sno-Isle Libraries would appreciate any suggestions on how to improve issues that matter, forums, or ideas you may have for future topics. And I would like to thank our panel, so please give them a round of applause. I'd also like to thank you, our attentive audience, for your thoughtful questions and comments, and also give yourself a round of applause. I'd like to do that as well. And last but not least, I want to thank the Sno-Isle Libraries and the Sno-Isle Libraries Foundation for making this forum possible. Please, I have just a couple more things to say. I would be remiss if I did not mention again the League of Women Voters, our co-sponsor for tonight's forum. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. It works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. For more information about the League, please see the display and associated materials in the back of the room, which is to your right. And if this evening's discussion has made you even more curious about the topic, then take the time to explore the many information resources available through your community library or online through the library's website. When you came in this evening, there were a host of books, some of the books that were offered in the library near the entrance to the left. So again, please feel free to hang around after we adjourn and speak with our panelists. And we thank you again for coming, and good evening.